Alina Reyes pushed her cleaning cart down the long hallway of the executive floor at Whitmore Industries, the wheels squeaking softly against the polished marble tiles that she had mopped hundreds of times before. This was her life now, and she had made peace with it a long time ago, or at least that is what she told herself every single night. When she came to work while the rest of the world went home to their families, she was 42 years old, a single mother with tired eyes and hands that had grown rough from years of scrubbing and cleaning and working. Jobs that nobody else wanted to do. Her daughter Sophia was the only bright light in her world, a 17-year-old girl with big dreams and a heart full of hope that Alina prayed would never be crushed by the weight of reality. The executive floor was always empty by the time Alina arrived for her shift at 7 in the evening. The important people with their expensive suits and fancy degrees had all gone home to their beautiful houses in the suburbs, leaving behind their trash and their coffee cups and their mess for someone like Alina to clean up. She never complained, because complaining did not pay the bills and it did not put food on the table for her daughter. Tonight was like any other night, or so Alina thought as she began her routine of emptying the trash bins in each office. She started with the corner office that belonged to the chief financial officer, a man named Richard Ashford, who never once looked at her face in 3 years, and then she moved on to the marketing department and the human resources department, until she finally reached the biggest office on the floor, the office of Mr. James Whitmore himself. The founder and CEO of Whitmore Industries. Mr. Whitmore was different from the others, and Alina had noticed this from her very first week on the job. He was the only executive who ever said hello to her, the only one who ever asked her name, and the only one who looked at her like she was a human being and not just a piece of furniture that happened to move around and clean things. His office was magnificent, with its floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the glittering city skyline. There were awards on the shelves and photographs on the walls showing Mr. Whitmore shaking hands with presidents and celebrities and world leaders. But there were also pictures of him building houses with volunteers and serving food at homeless shelters. He was a man of contradictions, wealthy beyond imagination, yet seemingly kind in ways that the other executives could never understand. Alina emptied his trash bin carefully, making sure not to disturb anything on his desk. She was always extra careful in this office because she respected Mr. Whitmore in a way that she could not quite explain. Perhaps because he was the only person in this entire building who treated her with dignity. As she turned to leave, something caught her eye on the floor near the door. A small envelope made of thick cream-colored paper with gold lettering that sparkled under the office lights. It must have fallen when someone opened the door, she thought, bending down to pick it up so she could place it back on Mr. Whitmore's desk where it belonged. But as she held the envelope in her hands, she could not help but notice how beautiful it was. The paper felt like silk between her rough fingers, and the gold lettering spelled out words that seemed to belong to another world. Entirely a world of champagne and chandelier, and people who never had to worry about paying their electric bill on time. The envelope was not sealed, and a card had slipped halfway out. Alina knew she should not look at it, knew it was none of her business, but curiosity got the better of her, and she read the elegant script that announced the annual Whitmore Industries charity gala to be held at the Whitmore estate on Saturday evening. Black tie required, dinner and dancing, proceeds to benefit children's education programs. Alina stared at the invitation for a long moment, imagining what such an event must be like. She had seen parties like this in movies and television shows, but she had never in her entire life been to anything so fancy. The closest she had ever come was her cousin's wedding 15 years ago in a church basement with paper plates and a DJ who played the same 10 songs over and over again. She was so lost in the thoughts that she did not hear the door open behind her, did not notice the footsteps approaching until a gentle voice made her jump nearly out of her skin. That is a beautiful invitation, is it not? Alina spun around, her face turning red with embarrassment as she found herself face to face with Mr. Whitmore himself. He was a tall man in his early 60s with silver hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. And he was smiling now as he looked at the invitation in her trembling hands. Mr. Whitmore, I am so sorry, Alina stammered, holding out the invitation like it was something dangerous. I found it on the floor and I was just going to put it on your desk. I was not trying to steal it or anything, I promise. Mr. Whitmore held up his hand to stop her rambling, and his smile grew even wider as he shook his head. Please, Alina, there is no need to apologize, he said, and she was surprised that he remembered her name because so many people in this building did not even know she existed. I have been meaning to speak with you actually. Alina's heart began to pound in her chest because those words usually meant trouble. In her experience, when important people wanted to speak with you, it was never for a good reason. It meant you were being fired or being blamed for something or being told that your services were no longer required. The gala is this Saturday, Mr. Whitmore continued, and Alina braced herself for whatever bad news was coming. And I think you should come for a moment. Alina was certain that she had misheard him. Surely he did not just invite her, the cleaning lady, to attend a fancy party with millionaires and celebrities and people who actually mattered in this world. I am sorry, sir, she said slowly, but I do not understand what you mean. Mr. Whitmore took the invitation from her hands and pressed it back toward her. his expression warm and genuine in a way that Elena had rarely seen from anyone in a position of power. I mean exactly what I said. Elena, I would like you to come to the gala as my guest. Everyone who works at this company contributes to its success, and that includes you. You have cleaned these offices for 3 years, always with a smile on your face and always doing excellent work, and I think you deserve to celebrate just as much as anyone else. Elena opened her mouth to protest, to explain all the reasons why this was a terrible idea. She did not have anything to wear. She did not know how to behave at fancy parties. She would not know a single person there, and everyone would know immediately that she did not belong. But something in Mr. Whitmore's eyes stopped her. I know what you are thinking, he said gently, as if he could read her mind, and I want you to know that you have just as much right to be there as anyone else. The gala is about celebrating our company and raising money for children who need help with their education. It is not about showing off expensive clothes or making people feel small. Elena looked down at the invitation in her hands, feeling the weight of it like it was made of gold. A part of her wanted to say no, wanted to give it back and return to a cleaning cart and pretend this conversation had never happened, but another part of her, a part that she had buried deep inside years ago, whispered that maybe, just maybe, she deserved one night of magic. I do not know, Mr. Whitmore, she said quietly. I am not sure I would fit in at something like this. Mr. Whitmore placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, and when he spoke, his voice was filled with a kindness that almost brought tears to her eyes. Elena, I have learned many things in my 63 years on this earth, and one of the most important lessons is this. The people who worry about fitting in are usually the ones who have the most to offer. Please think about it, and I truly hope to see you there on Saturday. With those words, he walked into his office and closed the door softly behind him, leaving Elena standing alone in the hallway with an invitation to a world she had never dared to imagine entering. She tucked the invitation carefully into the pocket of her uniform and returned to her cleaning cart, her mind spinning with possibilities and fears in equal measure. Could she really do this? Could she really walk into a room full of wealthy strangers and pretend that she belonged there? The answer, she realized, was that she did not know, but for the first time in a very long time, she wanted to find out. Elena did not sleep well that night, tossing and turning in her small bed as her mind raced with thoughts of the invitation that now sat on her nightstand like a golden ticket to another universe. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw images of beautiful women in elegant gowns and handsome men in expensive suits, and then she saw herself standing among them in her worn-out cleaning uniform with everyone pointing and laughing at her. The time morning came. She had convinced herself at least a dozen times that she would not go, that the whole idea was ridiculous, and that Mr. Whitmore had probably just felt sorry for her. But then she would pick up the invitation and read those beautiful words again, and a tiny spark of hope would flicker back to life in her chest. Sophia found her mother sitting at the kitchen table when she came down for breakfast, staring at the invitation with an expression that the girl had never seen before. It was something between fear and excitement and longing, all mixed together like ingredients in a recipe that Elena did not know how to cook. Mama, what is that? Sophia asked, sliding into the chair across from her mother and reaching for the box of cereal that sat in the middle of the table. Lena handed her the invitation without saying a word, watching her daughter's eyes grow wide as she read the elegant script. Sophia was a smart girl with good grades and big dreams of becoming a doctor someday, and Elena worked every extra shift she could get to save money for her daughter's college education. Mama, this is amazing, Sophia exclaimed, her face lighting up with genuine joy. You have to go. This is like something from a movie. Elena shook her head slowly, all her fears and doubts spilling out of her mouth before she could stop them. I cannot go. Mia, she said quietly, I do not have anything to wear. I do not know how to act at fancy parties, and everyone there will know immediately that I am just the cleaning lady who does not belong. They will laugh at me and I will feel like a fool. Sophia reached across the table and took her mother's rough hands in her own smooth ones, and when she spoke, her voice was filled with a wisdom that seemed far beyond her 17 years. Mama, you always tell me that I can be anything I want to be, that my dreams are valid and that I should never let anyone make me feel small. Why do you not believe the same things for yourself? Elena felt tears prick at her eyes because her daughter was right, and she knew it. She had spent her entire life telling Sophia to reach for the stars while she herself stayed firmly planted on the ground, afraid to even look up at the sky. It is different for you, Mia, Elena said softly. You are young and beautiful and smart. You have your whole life ahead of you. I am just an old woman who cleans toilets for a living. Sophia stood up from her chair and walked around the table to wrap her arms around her mother, holding her tight the way Elena used to hold Sophia when she was a little girl afraid of thunderstorms. You are not old, Mama. You are only 42, and you are the most beautiful and strongest woman I know. You raised me all by yourself. You worked 3 jobs at the same time to keep a roof over our heads, and you never once complained or gave up even when things were really hard. If anyone deserves one magical night, it is you. Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and looked up at her daughter, feeling something shift inside her heart. Maybe Sophia was right. Maybe she did deserve this one small gift after years of sacrifice and struggle. Maybe it was time to stop being invisible and remember what it felt like to be seen. Even if I wanted to go, Elena said slowly, I still do not have anything to wear. and the gala is only 4 days away. Cannot afford to buy a fancy dress, and even if I could, I would not know where to begin looking for one." Sophia's eyes sparkled with determination as a plan began to form in her clever mind. "We will figure it out. Mama, we always do remember when my prom was coming up and we did not have money for a dress, and we found that beautiful blue gown at the thrift store for only $20. We can do the same thing for you." And so that afternoon, mother and daughter set out on a mission to find the perfect dress for a party that Alina still was not entirely sure she would attend. They took the bus to the other side of town where the good thrift stores were, the ones that sometimes had designer clothes donated by wealthy women who got tired of their wardrobes after wearing things only. Once the first store had nothing but outdated styles and clothes that smelled like mothballs, and Alina was ready to give up after only 30 minutes of searching. But Sophia refused to let her quit, pulling her by the hand to the next store and then the next, insisting that the perfect dress was out there waiting for them. It was in the fourth store, a tiny shop called Second Chances that was tucked between a laundromat and a bakery, that Alina found it a simple black dress hanging in the corner like it had been waiting just for her. The fabric was soft and elegant, the cut was classic and timeless, and when Alina held it up to her body, Sophia gasped with delight. "Mama, that is the one. That is absolutely the one. You have to try it on right now." Alina disappeared into the tiny fitting room at the back of the store, her hands trembling as she slipped the dress over her head. It fit her like it had been made specifically for her body, hugging her curves in all the right places and flowing gracefully to just below her knees. She looked in the mirror, and for the first time in years, she saw someone beautiful looking back at her when she stepped out to show Sophia. Her daughter burst into tears of happiness. "Mama, you look like a princess," Sophia whispered. "You look like you belong at 100 fancy parties." Alina turned to look at the price tag, terrified of what she might find. The dress was clearly expensive, the kind of quality that she could never afford in a regular store, but when she saw the number written on the tag, she could hardly believe her eyes. $35, she breathed. "It is only $35. They bought the dress and hurried home like they had found buried treasure, which in a way they had. Over the next few days, Sophia helped her mother prepare for the gala in every way she could think of. She styled Alina's dark hair into an elegant updo. She did her makeup using techniques she had learned from videos on the internet, and she loaned her mother her favorite pair of simple pearl earrings that had been a gift from her grandmother years ago. The night of the gala arrived faster than Alina expected, and as she stood in front of the mirror in her tiny bedroom, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. The black dress fit perfectly. Her hair was swept up in a way that made her look sophisticated and graceful, and her face glowed with a soft beauty that had been hidden for far too long. Sophia stood behind her, beaming with pride as she adjusted a loose strand of her mother's hair. "You are going to be the most beautiful woman at that party, Mama," she said confidently, "and anyone who says otherwise is blind and stupid." Alina laughed nervously, her stomach full of butterflies that seemed to be multiplying by the second. "What if they make fun of me?" she asked quietly, voicing the fear that had been haunting her all week. "What if they know I do not belong and they treat me like I am nothing?" Sophia placed her hands on her mother's shoulders and looked at her reflection in the mirror, her young face serious and determined. "Then you will hold your head high and remember who you are. Mommy, you are Alina Reyes, the strongest woman in the world, and you do not need anyone's approval to know your own worth. Those fancy people with all their money and expensive clothes have never worked as hard as you have worked. They have never sacrificed as much as you have sacrificed, and they have no right to look down on you." Alina took a deep breath and nodded. Drawing strength from her daughter's words, she picked up her small purse, which Sophia had also found at the thrift store, and walked toward the front door of their little apartment. "I love you, Mia," she said, turning back for one last look at her daughter. "I love you too, Mama," Sophia replied with a smile. "Now go show them what a real queen looks like." And with that, Alina stepped out into the night, her heart pounding with fear and hope as she made her way toward a destiny she could never have imagined. The taxi pulled up to the iron gates of the Whitmore estate, and Alina felt her breath catch in her throat as she got her first glimpse of the mansion that rose up before her like something from a fairy tale. It was enormous, with white columns and tall windows that glowed with golden light, and a circular driveway where expensive cars were lined up like jewels on a necklace. Mercedes and BMW, and Rolls-Royces that probably cost more than Alina would earn in her entire lifetime. She paid the taxi driver with money she had saved from skipping lunches for the past 2 weeks, and then she stood alone at the edge of the driveway, watching other guests arrive in their magnificent vehicles. Women in sparkling gowns stepped out on the arms of men in perfectly tailored tuxedos, their laughter floating through the night air like music, their confidence shining brighter than the diamonds around their necks. Alina looked down at her simple black dress and suddenly felt foolish for thinking she could ever fit in at a place like this. Her dress was beautiful. Sophia had said so, but it was a $35 thrift store find standing among thousands of dollars worth of designer fashion. She was a drop of water trying to blend in with an ocean of champagne. She almost turned around right then, almost walked back down the long driveway to find another taxi and go home to a safe little apartment where she belonged. But then she heard Sophia's voice in her head, telling her to hold her head high and remember who she was, and she forced herself to take one step forward and then another until she was walking up the marble stairs toward the grand entrance. A man in a formal uniform stood at the door, checking invitations and greeting guests with a practiced smile. Elena's hands were shaking as she pulled her invitation from her small purse and handed it to him, certain that he would take one look at her and know that she was a fraud who had no business being here. But the man simply glanced at the invitation, nodded politely, and gestured for her to enter. "Welcome to the Whitmore Gala, madam," he said in a voice that betrayed no judgment. "Please enjoy your evening." Elena stepped through the doorway and into another world entirely, a world of crystal chandeliers that hung from ceilings painted with angels and clouds, of marble floors so polished that she could see her reflection looking back up at her, of flowers arranged in towering displays that filled the air with a sweet scent of roses and lilies and orchids that she could not even name. Everywhere she looked, there were beautiful people laughing and talking and holding glasses of champagne that sparkled like liquid gold. The women were stunning in their evening gowns of red and blue and silver and emerald green, their hair styled in elaborate arrangements that must have taken hours to create, their jewelry catching the light and throwing tiny rainbows onto the walls. The men were equally impressive in their black tuxedos and bow ties, their shoes shined to a mirror finish, their watches glinting on their wrists as they raised their glasses in toasts to business deals and successful ventures and all the things that rich people celebrated. Lena stood frozen just inside the entrance, overwhelmed by the sheer magnificence of everything around her. She had never felt so small in her entire life, so completely and utterly out of place. She was a mouse who had accidentally wandered into a gathering of lions, and at any moment she expected someone to notice her and demand to know what she was doing. There a waiter appeared at her side, offering her a glass of champagne from a silver tray. Elena took it automatically, grateful to have something to do with her trembling hands, and she mumbled a thank you that the waiter probably did not hear as he moved on to serve other guests. She needed to find somewhere to hide, somewhere she could stand quietly and observe without being observed herself. Her eyes scanned the enormous ballroom until they landed on a corner near the back where a magnificent grand piano sat on a small raised platform, currently silent and waiting for someone to bring it to life. Elena made her way through the crowd, keeping her head down and trying not to make eye contact with anyone. She was terrified that someone would stop her and start a conversation, would ask her what company she worked for or what she did for a living, and she would have to admit that she was just a cleaning lady who had been foolish enough to accept an invitation she never should have received. Reached the corner near the piano and pressed her back against the wall, finally allowing herself to breathe. From this position, she could see the entire ballroom without being the center of attention, could watch the wealthy guests mingle and laugh and dance without having to participate in their world. The piano beside her was the most beautiful instrument she had ever seen up close, a Steinway grand with a glossy black finish that reflected the lights from the chandeliers above. The keys were perfectly white and perfectly black, waiting in patient silence for skilled fingers to come and wake them from their slumber. Lena found herself staring at those keys, remembering a time long ago when her own fingers had danced across similar keys, when music had flowed from her hands like water from a fountain, when she had been someone entirely different from the invisible cleaning woman she had become. But that was another life, she reminded herself firmly, a life that had ended more than 20 years ago and would never come back, no matter how much she might sometimes wish for it in her most secret dreams. She sipped her champagne and watched the party unfold before her, trying to enjoy the experience even from the sidelines. The decorations were spectacular, with gold and white streamers hanging from the ceiling and candles flickering on every table, casting a warm glow over the room that made everything look soft and magically. A live orchestra played in another corner of the ballroom, filling the air with classical music that Elena recognized from her childhood. Mozart and Beethoven and Tchaikovsky, composers whose work she had once studied with passion and dedication before life had forced her to put away such frivolous dreams. Some couples had begun to dance on the polished floor in the center of the room, moving together with the grace of people who had taken lessons and attended cotillions and grown up in a world where knowing how to waltz was as natural as knowing how to breathe. Elena watched them with a mixture of admiration and sadness, remembering when she too had known how to move like that, when she had danced at her own debuts and recitals in another country and another time that felt more like a dream now than a memory. As she stood there in her corner, trying to make herself as small and invisible as possible, she began to recognize some of the faces in the crowd. There was Mr. Johnson from accounting, who had spilled coffee on his carpet 3 months ago and blamed Elena for not cleaning it fast enough. There was Miss Patterson from marketing, who talked on her phone every night while Elena emptied her trash and never once acknowledged her existence. And there was Mr. Ashford, the chief financial officer, who was currently laughing loudly with a group of other executives while his wife hung on his arm in a dress that probably cost more than Elena made in a year. None of them noticed her standing in the corner, which was exactly what she wanted. She was invisible here just as she was invisible at the office, a ghost who moved through their world without leaving any trace of her presence. Mr. Whitmore was across the room, shaking hands and greeting guests with the warm smile that Elena had come to know from her late nights cleaning his office. He was the host of this magnificent party, the man who had made all of this possible, and he moved through the crowd with an ease that came from years of practice and genuine enjoyment of bringing people together. Alina wondered if he had forgotten about her, if his invitation had been nothing more than a moment of kindness that he had put out of his mind as soon as the words left his lips. It would not surprise her. Powerful men said things all the time that they did not really mean, made promises they never intended to keep, but then, as if he could feel her watching him, Mr. Whitmore turned his head and looked directly at her across the crowded ballroom. Their eyes met for just a moment, and he smiled at her, a real smile, warm and genuine, before turning back to his guests. That small gesture, that tiny acknowledgement of her presence, meant more to Alina than all the champagne and chandeliers in the world. Someone saw her, someone knew she was there, and for tonight at least, she was not completely invisible. She took another sip of her champagne and settled more comfortably into her corner, deciding that perhaps she could survive this evening after all. She would stay in the shadows and watch the beautiful people dance, and when it was over, she would go home with a memory that would last her for the rest of her life. Little did she know that the evening was about to take a turn that would change everything she thought she knew about herself and her place in the world. Alina had been standing in her corner near the piano for almost an hour, nursing her second glass of champagne and watching the party swirl around her like a beautiful dream that she was observing from behind glass. She had started to relax a little, thinking that perhaps she could make it through the entire evening without incident, without anyone noticing the imposter hiding in plain sight among the glittering elite. But then a group of women began making their way across the ballroom, heading in her direction with champagne glasses in hand and laughter on their lips. They were the wives of the top executives at Whitmore Industries. Alina recognized them from the company Christmas parties where she had been invisible in her uniform, serving drinks and cleaning up spills, while these same women complained about their vacation homes and their personal trainers and all the other problems that came with having too much money. At the center of the group was Victoria Ashford, the wife of the chief financial officer, a woman who was beautiful in the cold and perfect way of an ice sculpture. Her blonde hair was swept up in an elaborate style that probably cost more than Alina's monthly rent. Her dress was a stunning creation of red silk that clung to her thin figure like a second skin, and her neck and ears and fingers dripped with diamonds that sparkled with every movement she made. The women settled into a cluster not far from where Alina stood, apparently drawn to the corner by the comfortable seating arrangement near the piano. They did not seem to notice Alina at first, or if they did, they dismissed her as unimportant. Just another anonymous guest who was not worth their attention. Alina kept her eyes forward, sipping her champagne and pretending to be fascinated by the orchestra on the other side of the room. She prayed that the women would have their conversation and move on, leaving her alone in her safe little corner where she could continue to be invisible. But prayers, she had learned long ago, were not always answered the way you hoped. Did you see that dreadful woman who came in earlier? One of the wives said loudly, not bothering to lower her voice because women like her never worried about who might overhear them. The one in that plain black dress that looked like she bought it at a garage sale. Alina's blood ran cold as she realized they were talking about her. She wanted to move away, to find another corner on the other side of the ballroom, but her feet seemed to be glued to the floor and her legs refused to obey her brain's desperate commands to run. Oh, I saw her, another woman replied with a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. I thought perhaps she was one of the catering staff who forgot to wear her uniform. Can you imagine showing up to an event like this in something so basic? The women laughed together, a chorus of cruelty that cut into Alina's heart like a knife made of ice. She stared straight ahead, refusing to look at them, refusing to let them see the tears that were beginning to burn behind her eyes. Victoria Ashford had been quiet until now, but when she spoke, her voice carried across the space between them with perfect clarity, and Alina knew without looking that the woman was aware of exactly where she was standing. I actually know who she is, Victoria said in a tone dripping with false sweetness that barely concealed the poison underneath. She is the cleaning woman from the office can. You believe Mr. Whitmore actually invited the help to attend his gala. I suppose he wanted to be charitable, but surely there are limits to how far one should take these things. The other women gasped with exaggerated shock, turning their heads to stare at Alina with expressions of horror and disgust as if she were a cockroach that had crawled out from under the refrigerator during a dinner party. The cleaning woman, one of them repeated in disbelief, you cannot be serious. Victoria, why on earth would she think it was appropriate to come here? Does she not understand that this event is for professionals and their spouses, not for people who scrub toilets for a living? Alina's face burned with humiliation, her cheeks turning red as the tears she had been fighting began to slip down her face. Despite her best efforts to hold them back, she wanted to defend herself, wanted to tell them that Mr. Whitmore had personally invited her and that she had just as much right to be there as anyone else. But the words stuck in her throat like stones that she could not swallow. Look at her dress, another wife said with a sneer that twisted her pretty face into something ugly. It probably cost less than my manicure who let her in here. Does security know that homeless people are wandering into the party? The women laughed again, louder this time, not caring or perhaps not realizing that Alina could hear every word they were saying. Or maybe they knew and simply did not care, because to them she was not a real person with real feelings. She was just the cleaning lady who had dared to step out of her proper place. Victoria Ashford smiled her cold smile and delivered the final blow. The words that would echo in Elena's mind for years to come. Someone really should tell her that this is not a costume party for the homeless, Victoria said, pausing to take a delicate sip of her champagne. Although I suppose we should not blame her entirely after all. How would someone like her know how to behave in polite society? It is not as if scrubbing floors teaches you anything about class or dignity. The other women nodded in agreement, murmuring their approval of Victoria's wit while Elena stood frozen in place, her heart shattered into a million pieces that scattered across the polished marble floor like drops of her pride and self-respect. She should leave. She knew she should leave right now before this got any worse. But something held her in place, some stubborn part of her soul that refused to let these cruel women chase her away from an event she had been personally invited to attend. She had worked hard her entire life. She had raised a daughter on her own. She had survived things that these pampered women could never even imagine, and she was not going to let their petty words destroy her. But standing firm and feeling confident were two very different things. And right now, Elena felt about as confident as a mouse facing down a pack of hungry cats. She kept her eyes forward and tried to breathe normally, tried to pretend that she had not heard anything, that their words had not cut her to the bone. One of the younger wives in the group, a woman with auburn hair and kinder eyes than the others, glanced over at Elena with something that might have been sympathy. But before she could say anything, Victoria Ashford noticed her looking and shot her a sharp glare that immediately silenced whatever compassion the young woman might have been feeling. Honestly, I do not know what James was thinking, Victoria continued, using Mr. Whitmore's first name with the casual familiarity of someone who considered herself his equal, inviting the cleaning staff to mingle with actual guests. Next, he will be asking the gardeners to join us for dinner and the pool boys to dance with our daughters. The women laughed once more, and Elena felt something inside her begin to crack. All the years of being invisible, all the nights of cleaning up after people who never bothered to learn her name, all the times she had smiled politely while executives treated her like furniture. It all came rushing up from the place deep inside where she had buried it, threatening to overflow like a river breaking through a dam. But she did not cry out, did not run away, did not give them the satisfaction of seeing how deeply their words had wounded her. Instead, she stood perfectly still with her chin held high, just as Sophia had told her to do, and she waited for the storm to pass. The women eventually grew bored with their cruel game and drifted away, to find new victims or new sources of entertainment, leaving Elena alone in her corner once again. She took a shaky breath and wiped the tears from her cheeks with trembling fingers, grateful that she had at least managed to survive the attack, without completely falling apart. But surviving was not the same as being unharmed, and as Elena looked down at her simple black dress that she and Sophia had been so proud of just hours ago, she could not help but see it through Victoria Ashford's eyes. It was cheap and plain and nothing like the magnificent gowns that swirled around her, and she was foolish to ever think that a $35 thrift store find could transform her into someone who belonged in a place like this. She set her champagne glass on a nearby table and prepared to leave, her spirit broken and a dream of one magical night shattered beyond repair. She would go home and tell Sophia that she had had a wonderful time, because her daughter did not need to know the truth about how cruel the world could be to people like them. But as she turned toward the exit, something caught her eye that made her stop in her tracks. The grand piano beside her, still sitting silent and magnificent, its black and white keys gleaming under the chandelier lights like they were calling out to her, inviting her to remember a part of herself that she had tried so hard to forget. Elena stared at the piano and felt the years melt away like snow under the warm spring sun. Suddenly she was not a 42-year-old cleaning woman standing humiliated at a party where she did not belong. She was a little girl of 6, sitting on her mother's lap in their small apartment in Madrid, listening to recordings of Chopin and Mozart and Beethoven while rain pattered against the windows like nature's own applause. Her mother, Rosa, had been a music teacher at a local school, a woman who believed that music was the language of the soul and that every child deserved to learn how to speak it. She had noticed Elena's gift early, the way her tiny daughter would hum along perfectly with the most complicated symphonies, the way she would tap out rhythms on any surface she could find, the way her eyes would light up whenever she heard someone playing the piano. When Elena was 7 years old, her mother had saved up enough money to buy a second-hand upright piano from a neighbor who was moving away. It was old and slightly out of tune and missing the felt on 3 of its keys, but to Elena it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, a magical instrument that could turn the emotions inside her heart into sounds that other people could hear and feel. She had taught herself to play before her mother could even afford proper lessons, picking out melodies by ear and figuring out chords through trial and error. By the time she was 9, she was playing pieces that most students did not attempt until they were teenagers, her small fingers flying across the keys with a speed and precision that amazed everyone who heard. Hera, professor from the Royal Conservatory of Madrid, came to hear her play when she was 10 years old. After her mother had written letter after letter begging for someone to give her daughter a chance, he had sat in their tiny living room with his arms crossed and his expression skeptical, clearly expecting to be disappointed. by yet another proud parent who overestimated her child's abilities. But when Alina finished playing Chopin's Fantasium, piece so difficult that many professional pianists avoided it, the professor had tears in his eyes. He offered her a full scholarship on the spot, telling Rosa that her daughter was one of the most naturally gifted musicians he had encountered in his 40 years of teaching. For the next 8 years, Alina lived and breathed music at the conservatory. She studied piano and music theory and composition and music history, spending 6 to 8 hours every day, practicing until her fingers ached and her back hurt from sitting on the hard bench. But she never complained, because playing the piano made her feel alive in a way that nothing else ever had. She gave her first public performance when she was 12, playing at a small recital hall in Madrid for an audience of about 100 people. She was so nervous that she thought she might faint. But the moment her fingers touched the keys, all her fear melted away and she lost herself in the music, playing not just with her hands but with her whole heart and soul. By the time she was 15, she was performing in concert halls across Spain, and critics were calling her a prodigy who would someday be mentioned in the same breath as the great masters. Invitations came from orchestras in Paris and Vienna and Berlin, all wanting the young Spanish girl with the magical hands to come and play with them. Elena's future seemed written in golden notes on sheets of musical staff paper. She would become a famous concert pianist, traveling the world and sharing her gift with audiences who would weep at the beauty of her playing. That was the dream, and for a while it seemed like nothing could stop it from coming true. But life, Elena learned, did not care about dreams. Her father, Antonio, would have always been a quiet man who worked long hours at a factory to support his family. He never complained about his lot in life, never expressed jealousy about the attention that Elena received for her musical talents, and never missed a single one of her performances, even when he had to take unpaid time off work to attend. When Elena was 17, her father was diagnosed with a disease that would slowly steal away his ability to walk, to use his hands, to feed himself, to do all the simple things that healthy people took for granted. The doctors said he would need full-time care within a year, and the treatments and medications would cost more money than the family could ever hope to afford. Elena watched her mother age 10 years in a single month as Rosa tried to hold everything together. She continued teaching during the day and caring for her husband at night, barely sleeping and never complaining, even as dark circles appeared under her eyes and her hair began to turn grayther. Bills piled up like fallen leaves in autumn, each one demanding money that simply did not exist. The scholarship covered Elena's education but not the family's medical expenses, and soon they were faced with an impossible choice: continue Elena's training at the conservatory or use what little savings they had left to care for her father Lee, who made the decision before her mother could even suggest it. She left the conservatory 2 months before her 18th birthday, just weeks before she was supposed to give the biggest performance of her young career, a solo recital at the Palau de la Música Catalana in Barcelona that had been sold out for months. Her professors begged her to reconsider, telling her that she was throwing away a gift that came along once in a generation. But Elena just shook her head and said that some things were more important than music, more important than dreams, more important than anything she might achieve on a stage. She took a job as a waitress at a restaurant near their apartment, working double shifts to help pay for her father's care. Her hands that had once danced across piano keys now carried heavy trays of food and scrubbed dishes in the kitchen sink at night. When she finally fell into bed, exhausted, she sometimes dreamed that she was playing again, and she would wake up with tears on her pillow. Her father died 3 years later, despite all their efforts and sacrifices. By then, Elena's mother was also sick, worn down by years of stress and grief and poverty, and Elena spent the next 2 years caring for her until Rosa too passed away, leaving her daughter alone in the world with nothing but memories and heartbreak. A cousin in America offered to sponsor Elena for a visa, promising her a fresh start in a country where no one knew her name or her story. Elena accepted because she had nothing left to lose, packing a single suitcase and leaving Spain forever. She did not bring any of her sheet music or her awards or her photographs from performances, because those things belonged to a different Elena, a girl who had died along with her dreams. She arrived in America at 23 years old, speaking broken English and knowing no one. She took whatever work she could find, cleaning houses, washing dishes, scrubbing floors in office buildings, and she never once touched a piano, because every time she saw one, the pain of what she had lost was too much to bear. 20 years had passed since then, 20 years of being invisible and ordinary and unremarkable. She had built a small life for herself and her daughter, a life without music but also without the terrible pain that music reminded her of. She had buried that part of herself so deep that sometimes she almost forgot it had ever existed. But now, standing next to this beautiful Steinway at a party where everyone had just witnessed her humiliation, Elena felt all those buried memories rising up from the grave where she had tried to keep them hidden. Her fingers tingled with the memory of how the keys had felt beneath them. Her heart ached with the loss of something so precious that she had never fully allowed herself to mourn. If she reached out her hand, not quite touching the piano but hovering just above its polished surface like she was afraid that contact might burn her, the instrument seemed to pulse with an energy that called out to the musician still hiding somewhere inside her. The prodigy who had been forced to give up everything she loved for a family who needed her more somewhere across the ballroom. She could hear Victoria Ashford laughing at another cruel joke. The sound reminded Elena of why she had come here tonight, of the dream she had once dared to have before life taught her that dreams were luxuries that people like her could not afford. She pulled her hand back from the piano and turned away, telling herself that it was too late, that the girl who had played Chopin in concert halls across Spain was gone forever and could never come back. The cleaning woman had won, and the pianist had lost, and that was simply the way things were. But somewhere deep inside her chest, in a place she had tried so hard to silence, Elena felt her heart disagree. The evening continued to unfold around Elena like a beautiful painting that she was not allowed to touch. She remained in her corner near the silent piano, watching the wealthy guests laugh and dance and drink champagne as if they had not a single worry in the entire world. And perhaps they did not. Perhaps when you had enough money to buy anything you wanted, worries simply melted away like morning frost under the rising sun. The orchestra had taken a break, and the ballroom buzzed with conversation and the clinking of glasses. Waiters moved through the crowd like silent ghosts, refilling champagne flutes and offering tiny appetizers that looked more like art than food. Had not eaten anything all evening because she was too nervous to trust her shaking hands with delicate finger foods that might end up on the front of her dress. She had decided to stay for just a little while longer, not because she was enjoying herself, but because leaving now would feel too much like running away. Victoria Ashford and her cruel friends were on the other side of the room, and Elena did not want to give them the satisfaction of knowing they had driven her out. She would stay until a respectable hour and then slip away quietly. Like the invisible woman she had always been, Mr. Whitmore had taken the stage at the front of the ballroom, standing behind a microphone with the easy confidence of a man who was accustomed to having people listen when he spoke. The crowd fell silent as he began to talk about the charity they were supporting tonight, a foundation that provided music education to underprivileged children who could not afford instruments or lessons. Music has the power to transform lives, Mr. Whitmore said, his voice warm and sincere. It teaches discipline and creativity and self-expression, and every child deserves the chance to discover whether they have a melody hiding inside them, waiting to be set free. Elena felt a sharp pain in her chest as she listened to his words. She thought of herself at 6 years old, sitting on her mother's lap and falling in love with the piano for the first time. She thought of all the children out there who might have the same gift she had been born with, children who might never get the chance to discover it because the world was not fair and dreams cost money that poor families did not have. Mr. Whitmore continued his speech, explaining that the highlight of the evening would be a special musical performance to accompany the charity auction. A renowned pianist had been hired to play a selection of classical pieces while guests bid on valuable items donated by the company's executives and partners. I am told that Marcus Chen, the pianist we engaged for this evening, will be joining us shortly to begin the performance, Mr. Whitmore said, glancing toward a door at the side of the ballroom where a nervous-looking young man in a tuxedo had just appeared. The young man hurried over to Mr. Whitmore and whispered something in his ear. Elena watched as Mr. Whitmore's expression shifted from anticipation to concern to disappointment, his smile faltering for just a moment before he recovered his composure. I am afraid I have some unfortunate news, Mr. Whitmore announced to the crowd. Our pianist, Mr. Chen, has fallen ill this evening and will not be able to perform as planned. We are working to find a solution, but for now, I ask for your patience as we determine how to proceed. A murmur of disappointment rippled through the crowd. Guests exchanged glances and shook their heads, clearly let down by this unexpected development. The charity auction without musical accompaniment would be like a wedding without flowers, technically complete but missing something essential that elevated it from ordinary to special. Elena watched Mr. Whitmore step away from the microphone and confer with his assistants. Their faces creased with worry as they discussed options that were clearly limited. Finding a professional pianist at the last minute on a Saturday evening was nearly impossible, and the party that had been so carefully planned was now in danger of losing its most anticipated element. Victoria Ashford's voice cut through the disappointed murmurs, loud enough to carry across half the ballroom. Well, this is certainly a disaster, she said to her circle of friends, making no effort to hide her criticism. I cannot believe they did not have a backup plan in this. How difficult is it to find someone who can bang on a few keys? One of her companions laughed and replied, perhaps we should ask if anyone here knows how to play. Surely someone among all these accomplished people must have taken a lesson or two in their youth. Victoria's eyes swept the room with theatrical amusement, and Elena felt her stomach clench with dread as the woman's gaze landed on the corner where she stood, beside the silent Steinway. There was a gleam in Victoria's eyes that promised more cruelty, more humiliation, more pain. Oh, I have a wonderful idea, Victoria announced, her voice dripping with false enthusiasm that barely concealed the venom underneath. Why do we not ask the cleaning lady if she has any hidden talents? Perhaps between scrubbing toilets and emptying trash bins, she found time to learn a tune or two. The women around Victoria laughed, and several other guests nearby turned to look in Elena's direction. She felt her face burn with fresh humiliation as people who had not noticed her before suddenly became aware of her invisible woman in the plain black dress standing alone near the piano that no one could play. I hear that janitors are very musical, another woman added with a sneer. All that time alone at night gives them plenty of opportunity to practice. Perhaps she can play us a lovely rendition of something by the great composer. Mop and bucket. More laughter. More cruel eyes turning toward Alina. More whispered comments that she could not hear but could easily imagine. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. Wanted to disappear into the walls and never be seen again. This was worse than before. Worse than the whispered mockery in the corner, because now it was public. Now everyone was watching. Mr. Whitmore had turned at the sound of Victoria's raised voice, and Alina saw him frown as he realized what was happening. He began to make his way across the ballroom, clearly intending to put a stop to the cruel entertainment that Victoria was providing at Alina's expense. But before he could reach them, Victoria delivered one final blow. In all seriousness, though, she said, addressing the room at large with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in her entire privileged life, it really is too bad that we cannot find anyone cultured enough to play for us, but I suppose we cannot expect miracles from a crowd that apparently includes the janitorial staff. She laughed at her own joke, and her friends joined in, and Alina stood frozen beside the piano with tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. She had never felt so small, so worthless, so completely and utterly alone in a room full of people. The Grand Steinway sat silent beside her, its keys still and waiting, and Alina could almost hear it whispering to her, asking why she was letting these people destroy her when she had the power to show them exactly who they were dealing with, exactly what kind of person they had chosen to mock and belittle and dismiss. But that was foolish, she told herself. That was the fantasy of a woman who had given up the right to sit at a piano 20 years ago. The prodigy from Madrid was dead and buried, and the cleaning woman from the executive floors had nothing to offer this room full of wealthy strangers except more ammunition for their cruel jokes. The piano sat silent, and Alina stood silent, and the party continued around them both while Victoria Ashford basked in the attention her cruelty had earned her. Mr. Whitmore finally reached Alina's corner of the ballroom, his face showing the same kind and gentle expression that she remembered from the night he had invited her to this gala. He positioned himself between Alina and the rest of the room, blocking her from the staring eyes and cruel smiles that had been directed at her for the past several minutes. I apologize for that, he said quietly, his voice meant only for her ears. Victoria can be unkind, and I am sorry that you had to experience her behavior. It was not fair and it was not right. Alina shook her head, not trusting herself to speak without her voice breaking. She appreciated Mr. Whitmore's kindness, but she wished he had not come over, because now she felt even more exposed, even more aware that everyone in the room was watching to see what would happen next. I think I should go, she managed to whisper. I do not belong here, and everyone knows it. I was foolish to think that I could pretend to be something I am not, even for one evening. Mr. Whitmore studied her face for a long moment, his eyes thoughtful and searching, as if he was seeing something that Alina herself had forgotten existed. She shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, not understanding what he was looking for or why he was looking at her with such intensity. You know, he said slowly, I have been watching you this evening. Alana, I noticed that you chose to stand near the piano rather than anywhere else in this entire ballroom, and I noticed how you looked at it when you first arrived, like you were greeting an old friend you had not seen in many years. Alina felt her heart skip a beat, suddenly afraid that Mr. Whitmore had somehow discovered her secret. But that was impossible. She had never told anyone in America about her past, had never mentioned the conservatory or the performances or the dreams she had abandoned. That life belonged to another Alina in another country, and she had worked very hard to keep it buried. It is a beautiful instrument, she said carefully. Anyone would admire it. Mr. Whitmore smiled, but his eyes remained serious and probing. Perhaps, he agreed, but most people admire a piano the way they admire a painting or a sculpture. They appreciate its beauty from a distance. As observers, you looked at that piano the way a mother looks at a child she has been separated from. With longing and love and pain all mixed together, Alina did not know what to say. This man saw too much, understood too much, and she was not prepared to open doors that she had spent 20 years keeping firmly closed. Some things were too painful to revisit, too dangerous to remember, and her music was the most painful and dangerous thing of all. I also noticed something a few months ago, Mr. Whitmore continued, his voice gentle but persistent. I was working late one night and I heard someone humming in the hallway the most beautiful melody, Debussy's Clair de Lune if I am not mistaken. I looked out and saw you with your cleaning cart, and your fingers were moving against the handle as if you were playing an invisible keyboard. Alina's breath caught in her throat. She had not even realized she was doing it that night. We had not been aware that anyone could hear her humming or see her fingers moving through muscle memories. She had thought she was alone, had let her guard down for just a moment, and Mr. Whitmore had seen everything. I do not play anymore, she said quietly, the words coming out like a confession or perhaps like an apology. That was a very long time ago. In another life. Mr. Whitmore nodded, as if this answer did not surprise him. May I ask why you stopped? It was a simple question, but it opened floodgates that Alina had kept sealed for 2 decades. She thought of her father's illness and her mother's exhaustion and the impossible choice she had been forced to make. She thought of the concert she had never played in Barcelona and the career she had sacrificed, and the years of silence that had followed. Life happened, she said finally. because that was the simplest explanation she could offer. Sometimes we have to give up the things we love to take care of the people we love. Why do not regret the choice I made? But I cannot go back to what I was before. Mr. Whitmore was quiet for a moment, considering her words with the thoughtful attention of a man who took people seriously even when the rest of the world dismissed them. Cannot, he repeated softly, or will not. Alina opened her mouth to argue, to insist that she physically could not play anymore after so many years away from the instrument, but she realized that this would be a lie. And something about Mr. Whitmore made her not want to lie to him. He had been kind to her when he did not have to be, and he deserved honesty in return. Will not, she admitted, the words painful as they left her lips. The piano holds too many memories, too much loss. Every time I think about playing, I remember everything I gave up and everyone I lost, and the pain is more than I can bear. Mr. Whitmore nodded slowly, and when he spoke again, his voice was filled with a compassion that brought tears to Elena's eyes. I understand loss, he said quietly. My wife passed away 7 years ago, and for a long time I could not bear to enter the garden she had loved so much. Every flower reminded me of her. Every plant she had tended with such care felt like a wound that would not heal. He paused, looking out across the ballroom at all the guests who had no idea that their hosts carried such grief inside his heart. But eventually I realized that avoiding the garden was not protecting me from pain, it was preventing me from healing. The memories hurt, yes, but they also kept her alive in some small way. When I finally walked through her garden again, I felt like I was visiting her, honoring her, keeping her spirit close. Alina wiped a tear from her cheek, moved by his words and by the unexpected connection she felt with this wealthy man who had every reason to see her as beneath his notice. The piano was everything to me once, she whispered. I was supposed to be a concert pianist. I trained at the conservatory in Madrid. I performed in halls across Spain, but I gave it all up when my parents got sick, and after they died, I could not find my way back to the music. Mr. Whitmore's eyes widened with surprise, but also with something that looked like recognition, as if pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. The Royal Conservatory of Madrid, he asked, and when Alina nodded, he let out a breath of amazement. Alina, that is one of the most prestigious music schools in all of Europe. Do you know how rare it is to be accepted there? How exceptional you must have been. Alina shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Those days felt so far away now, like they had happened to someone else entirely. That was a different person, she said. That girl died a long time ago. Mr. Whitmore reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. I do not think she died, he said gently. I think she went into hiding, and I think she has been waiting for permission to come back out. Alina, I am not going to force you to do anything you do not want to do, but I am going to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it before you answer. He gestured toward the grand piano, its black surface gleaming under the lights. Would you play for us tonight? Not for Victoria Ashford or any of the cruel people in this room, but for the children this charity helps, for the music you once loved, and perhaps for yourself, to prove that they did not take everything from you, that there is still a part of you that remembers what it felt like to fly. Elena stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. He was asking the impossible, asking her to expose her deepest wound to a room full of strangers, who had already proven they would use any weakness against her. But somewhere deep inside, beneath all the fear and pain and years of silence, she felt something stir, a tiny flame that had never quite gone out, a spark of the girl who had once made audiences weep with the beauty of her playing. I do not know if I can, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Mr. Whitmore squeezed her hand gently. You do not have to know, he said. You just have to try. Elena's legs felt like they were made of water as she walked a few steps from her corner to the piano bench. The entire ballroom had fallen silent, every eye in the room fixed on the cleaning woman who had somehow become the center of attention at a party where she had been invisible just hours before. She could feel Victoria Ashford's stare burning into her back, could imagine the smirk on that cruel woman's face as she waited for Elena to fail and embarrass herself in front of everyone. This was exactly what Victoria wanted. Elena realized a public humiliation that would prove once and for all that the help should know their place and stay in it. Mr. Whitmore had announced to the crowd that they had found someone to play for the charity auction after all, and Elena had watched the reactions range from curious to skeptical to openly dismissive. No one believed that she could actually play. No one expected anything from her except perhaps a fumbling attempt at chopsticks or Mary had a little lamb. She sat down on the bench and felt the familiar height and distance of the keyboard in front of her. Her body remembered this position even after 20 years, remembered how to sit with her back straight and her shoulders relaxed and her feet positioned correctly on the pedals below. The Steinway was magnificent, even more beautiful up close than it had been from across the room. The keys were perfect ivory and ebony, smooth and cool beneath her trembling fingers as she placed her hands in position. She had not touched a piano in 2 decades, had not allowed herself even to sit at one, and now she was about to play in front of hundreds of wealthy strangers who expected her to fail. Her mind went blank with terror, all the music she had ever learned suddenly disappearing like smoke in the wind. She could not remember a single note, could not recall any of the thousands of pieces she had once played from memory. Her hands hovered over the keys like frozen birds, unable to move. unable to fly. Someone in the crowd coughed, and Alina heard a woman whisper something that sounded like "I told you so." The seconds stretched out like hours, and she felt panic rising in her chest, threatening to overwhelm her and sent her running from the room in shame. But then she closed her eyes and did something she had not done in 20 years. She let herself remembered. She remembered her mother's hands guiding hers across the keys for the first time, showing her where each finger should go. She remembered the pride in her father's eyes when she played her first complete song without making a mistake. She remembered the professor at the conservatory who had cried when he heard her play, who had told her mother that Alina had a gift from God. She remembered the feeling of losing herself in the music, of becoming nothing but a vessel through which beautiful sounds could flow. She remembered how it felt to make strangers weep with joy, to touch their hearts without ever speaking a word, to communicate emotions that language could never capture. And she remembered the night before she left the conservatory forever, when she had played Chopin's Ballade No. 1 alone in an empty practice room, saying goodbye to the instrument that had been her closest companion and her greatest love. She had played it as a farewell, a funeral song for the dreams she was burying, and she had sworn she would never play it again. But perhaps, she thought now, perhaps it was time to play it not as a farewell but as a reunion. Perhaps it was time to stop mourning what she had lost and start celebrating what she still carried inside. A hot Alina opened her eyes and looked down at the keys, and suddenly the music was there again, flooding back into her mind like water rushing through a broken dam. Her fingers knew where to go, her body remembered the movements, her soul remembered the song. The ballad was there, waiting for her, just as it had been waiting for 20 years. She pressed the first key, and the note rang out across the silent ballroom like a bell announcing something holy. It was a single note, soft and questioning, but it was perfect. Her touch had not failed her, her ear was still true, and the piano responded to her fingers as if it had been waiting its whole existence for this moment. The second note followed, and then the third, and then Alina stopped thinking and started playing. Her hands moved across the keyboard with a speed and precision that surprised even her, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought could not keep up. She was playing Chopin's Ballade No. 1, one of the most difficult and beautiful pieces ever written for the piano, and she was playing it as if her life depended on every single note. The opening theme was gentle and melancholic, a whispered confession of love and loss that seemed to float through the air like autumn leaves falling from a tree. Alina let the music speak for her, let it say all the things she had never been able to say in words: the grief of losing her parents, the pain of giving up her dreams, the loneliness of being invisible in a world that did not care whether she existed. The ballroom was completely silent now, not the dismissive silence of boredom but the reverent silence of people who suddenly realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Champagne glasses were lowered, conversations were forgotten, and every person in the room stood transfixed as the cleaning woman in the plain black dress poured her soul out through the piano. Alina did not see their faces, did not notice that Victoria Ashford's smirk had disappeared, did not observe that Mr. Whitmore had tears running down his cheeks. She was somewhere else entirely, lost in the music that had been her first language, reunited with a part of herself that she had thought was gone forever. The ballad built in intensity, moving from gentle sorrow to passionate anger to desperate yearning. Alina's fingers flew across the keys, striking chords that shook the chandeliers above and playing runs so fast that her hands seemed to blur. This was not the playing of someone who had been away from the instrument for 20 years. This was the playing of a prodigy who had simply been waiting for permission to return. She thought of her mother, who had believed in her talent before anyone else and had sacrificed so much to give her the chance to develop it. She played for her mother, honoring the woman who had taught her that music was the language of the soul. She thought of her father, who had worked himself nearly to death to support his family and had never once complained about his lot in life. She played for her father, thanking the man who had shown her what true strength and sacrifice looked like. She thought of Sophia, her beautiful daughter who still believed that dreams could come true and that her mother was the strongest woman in the world. She played for Sophia, proving that her faith had not been misplaced. And she thought of herself, the little girl who had fallen in love with the piano at 6 years old, the prodigy who had dazzled audiences across Spain, the woman who had buried her gift in order to survive. She played for that Alina, forgiving her for giving up and welcoming her back home. The music crescendoed to its thunderous climax, Alina's entire body moving with the force of the notes she was producing. Her hair had come loose from its careful arrangement and fell around her face like a dark curtain. Her simple black dress rippled with the movement of her arms, and her expression was one of fierce concentration mixed with pure, unbridled joy. For these minutes, she was not a cleaning woman or an immigrant or a single mother struggling to make ends meet. She was Alina Reyes, pianist, the girl from Madrid who had once been told she would be mentioned in the same breath as the great masters. She was exactly who she had always been meant to be, and no amount of cruelty or hardship or years of silence could take that away from her. The final section of the ballad approached, and Alina felt tears streaming down her face even as her fingers continued their impossible dance across the keys. This was not sadness. This was released 20 years of grief and loss and longing all flowing out of her through the music, leaving her lighter with every note. She was not just playing a piece by she was telling her own story, sharing her own pain, revealing her own soul to a room full of strangers who had no idea what they were witnessing. And somehow, in that vulnerability, she found a strength she had forgotten she possessed. The music was the most beautiful thing she had ever created, and it was also the most honest. It was everything she was and everything she had been and everything she still hoped to become, all wrapped up in the notes of a piece she had thought she would never play again. The final notes of the ballade hung in the air like stars that refused to fade. Elena's hands remained on the keys for a long moment. Trembling with the emotion and exertion of what she had just accomplished, she had played for 12 uninterrupted minutes, and every single note had been perfect. Every phrase shaped with the care of someone who had spent years learning how to make a piano sing. The ballroom was silent, so silent that Elena could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She was afraid to look up, afraid to see the faces of the people who had been watching her, afraid that somehow what had felt so transcendent from behind the piano had not translated to the audience at all. Maybe she had made mistakes she was not aware of. Maybe her technique had deteriorated so badly that what felt like magic to her had sounded like noise to everyone else. 20 years was a long time to be away from an instrument, and perhaps the connection she had felt was nothing more than wishful thinking from a woman desperate to reclaim a part of her past. She finally raised her eyes from the keyboard and looked out at the sea of faces before her, expecting to see polite discomfort or barely concealed disappointment. Instead, she saw something that made her breath catch in her throat. Hundreds of tears glistening on the cheeks of men and women who had forgotten they were supposed to be too sophisticated to cry. Mr. Whitmore was the first to move. He rose from his seat with a grace that belied his years and began to clap, his hands coming together slowly at first and then faster, the sound echoing through the silent ballroom like thunder rolling across the mountains one by one. The other guests followed his lead. A woman in a blue gown stood up and joined the applause, then a man in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, then a couple near the door, then another and another and another until the entire ballroom was on its feet. Hundreds of people applauding a cleaning woman who had just revealed herself to be something far more extraordinary than any of them had imagined. The applause grew louder and louder, crashing over Elena like waves on a shore. People were calling out "bravo" and "magnificent," in other words that she could not quite hear over the thunder of clapping hands. This was not polite applause, not the restrained appreciation of a sophisticated crowd. This was the raw, unfiltered response of people who had been genuinely moved by what they had just witnessed. Elena stood up from the piano bench on legs that felt like they might collapse at any moment. She did not know what to do with her hands, did not know where to look, did not know how to respond to the overwhelming wave of appreciation that was washing over her. For 20 years she had been invisible, and now suddenly everyone could see her, really see her, and it was almost too much to bear. She saw the young wife with auburn hair and kind eyes, the one who had seemed sympathetic earlier when Victoria Ashford was being cruel. The woman was openly weeping, mascara running down her cheeks as she clapped and shook her head in disbelief. Whatever she had expected from the cleaning lady, it clearly had not been this. She saw Mr. Johnson from accounting, the man who had blamed her for not cleaning his coffee stain fast enough. He was staring at her with his mouth hanging open, his hands clapping mechanically as his brain struggled to reconcile the woman he had ignored for 3 years with the artist who had just made the room fall silent. She saw Ms. Patterson from marketing, who had never once acknowledged Elena's existence. The woman was wiping tears from her eyes with a napkin and applauding so hard that her expensive bracelets were jangling on her wrist. Something had shifted in how she looked at Elena. Some wall of indifference had crumbled and been replaced with genuine awe. Then Elena saw Victoria Ashford, and the sight almost made her laugh out loud despite the tears still streaming down her own face. The woman who had been so cruel, so dismissive, so absolutely certain of her own superiority stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom, her face pale and her eyes wide with shock. She was not clapping, was not moving at all, was simply staring at Elena as if she had just witnessed a ghost materialized before her eyes. Victoria's friends were all on their feet, applauding enthusiastically, apparently having forgotten their earlier mockery in the face of undeniable brilliance. But Victoria herself seemed unable to move, unable to reconcile the cleaning woman she had treated like garbage with the musician who had just performed at a level that few professionals ever achieved. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Elena felt something unexpected rise up in her chest. Not anger, not resentment, not the desire for revenge that she might have expected. Instead, she felt something that surprised her, something that felt almost like pity. Victoria Ashford had everything that money could buy: the designer dress, the diamond jewelry, the mansion in the suburbs, and the luxury cars in the garage. But she had just been confronted with proof that the things that really mattered in life could not be purchased at any price, that talent and passion and soul were gifts that no amount of wealth could manufacture. Yana had spent years feeling inferior to women like Victoria, believing that her worth was measured by the size of her paycheck or the label in her clothes. But in this moment, standing before a room full of people who were all on their feet in tribute to her gift, she realized that she had possessed something valuable all along, something that Victoria, for all her money and privilege, would never have. The applause continued for what felt like an eternity. Elena's hands were shaking and her face was wet with tears. but she managed to bow a small, the graceful inclination of her head that she had learned at the conservatory so many years ago, a gesture of respect to the audience that had honored her with their attention and their emotion. Mr. Whitmore made his way through the crowd to stand beside her, and when he reached her, he did something that surprised everyone in the room. He embraced her, wrapping his arms around the cleaning woman in front of all his wealthy guests and holding her like she was the most important person in the world. "That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Elena, thank you for sharing that with us." Elena could not speak, could barely breathe. She simply nodded against his shoulder and let the tears flow, releasing decades of grief and loneliness and fear in the arms of a kind man who had seen something in her that she had forgotten existed. When Mr. Whitmore finally released her and stepped back, the applause was beginning to fade, but the atmosphere in the room had been permanently altered. People who had looked through Elena like she was made of glass were now looking at her with new eyes, seeing not a cleaning woman but a human being with depths they could never have imagined. The charity auction that followed raised more money than any previous year. Guests bid enthusiastically on items they might have ignored before, inspired by the performance they had just witnessed and the story it implied, a story of talent and sacrifice and resilience that reminded them why they were there in the first place, why helping underprivileged children find their own gifts was worth every dollar they could donate. Elena stood quietly to the side as the auction proceeded, still dazed by what had happened. People kept coming up to her throughout the evening, shaking her hand and thanking her and asking questions about her training and her background. Questions she answered as briefly as she could, still not entirely comfortable with the attention after so many years of invisibility. But she noticed that one person never approached her, never offered congratulations or acknowledgement of any kind. Victoria Ashford had retreated to a corner of the ballroom with her husband, her face pinched and her posture stiff, and she left the party early without saying goodbye to anyone. Elena watched her go and felt the strangest mix of emotions, vindication and sadness, and something that might have been compassion. Victoria would go home to her big house and her expensive things and her empty life, and she would probably never understand what she had witnessed tonight, would never grasp why a cleaning woman playing the piano had mattered more than all her diamonds put together. But Elena understood, and for the first time in 20 years, she felt like she finally understood herself as well. Elena arrived home that night long after midnight, her feet aching from the borrowed heels and her heart so full of emotion that she thought it might burst. Sophia was waiting for her in the living room, having stayed awake despite Elena's instructions to go to bed, and the moment Elena walked through the door, her daughter jumped up from the couch with eyes full of questions. "Mama, how was it?" Sophia asked eagerly. "Did you have a good time? Were the people nice to you? Tell me everything." Elena sat down heavily on their worn sofa and looked at her daughter for a long moment, not knowing where to begin. So much had happened in the span of a few hours that it felt like a lifetime had passed since she had walked out that door in her thrift store dress and borrowed pearls. "Mia," she said finally, her voice still hoarse from the tears she had shed, "I have something to tell you, something I should have told you a long time ago." And then Elena told Sophia everything, the whole story that she had kept buried for 20 years. She told her about the piano lessons in Madrid and the professor who had cried when he heard her play, about the conservatory and the performances and the dreams of a career that would take her around the world. She told her about her father's illness and her mother's exhaustion and the impossible choice that had forced her to give up everything she loved. Sophia listened with tears streaming down her face, learning for the first time that her mother had once been someone extraordinary, someone destined for greatness who had sacrificed it all without a word of complaint or regret. "Why did you never tell me?" Sophia asked when Elena had finished. "All these years, all the times I talked about my dreams, why did you never tell me about yours?" Elena took her daughter's hands in her own and squeezed them gently. "Because I did not want you to feel responsible for my choices," she said softly. "I did not want you to think that my dreams died so that yours could live. That is not how it works, Mia. I chose to take care of my parents because I loved them, and I chose to raise you because you are the greatest gift I have ever been given. My dreams did not die, they simply changed shape." She paused and smiled, remembering the feeling of her fingers on the piano keys, the music flowing through her like it had never left. "But tonight, I realized that maybe they do not have to stay buried anymore." The next morning, Elena's phone began to ring. She did not recognize the numbers, but when she answered, she found herself speaking with reporters and producers and agents. Somehow, someone at the gala had recorded her performance and posted it on the internet, and overnight it had been shared thousands of times, then hundreds of thousands of times, then millions. The video showed a woman in a simple black dress sitting down at a piano while elegant guests watched with skeptical expressions. It showed her hands trembling as she placed her fingers on the keys, and then it showed her playing with a passion and skill that left the camera operator gasping in amazement. You could hear it on the recording. The intake of breath, the whispered "oh my God" as the music poured forth. News stations wanted to interview her, concert halls wanted to book her, record labels wanted to sign her. Overnight, Elena Reyes had become famous, the cleaning woman who had silenced a room full of millionaires with nothing but her talent and her truth. But it was a call from Mr. Whitmore that mattered most to Elena. He asked her to come to his office on Monday morning, and when she arrived still in her cleaning uniform because old habits died hard, he stood up from his desk and greeted her with the same warm smile that had started this whole journey. Alina, I have been thinking about your situation all weekend, he said, gesturing for her to sit down in one of the comfortable chairs across from his desk, and I have a proposal that I would like you to consider. He explained that he wanted to create a new position for her, Whitmore Industries Events Coordinator, responsible for organizing the company's charitable functions and cultural programs. The salary was more than triple what she currently earned. The hours were reasonable, and the work would allow her to use her musical knowledge and her obvious talent for touching people's hearts. But that is not all, Mr. Whitmore continued, reaching into his desk drawer and pulling out an envelope. I have also spoken with the board of directors, and we have unanimously agreed to fund a full scholarship for Sophia's college education wherever she wants to go. Whatever she wants to study, the company will pay for it. Alina stared at him in disbelief, unable to process what he was saying. This was more than she had ever dared to dream, more than she had ever allowed herself to hope for. A real job, a real salary, and her daughter's future secured without the crushing burden of student loans. Mr. Whitmore, I do not know what to say, she stammered, tears already forming in her eyes. This is too much. I cannot accept. You can and you will, Mr. Whitmore interrupted gently. Alina, you have worked harder than almost anyone I know. You have sacrificed more than most people could imagine, and you have done it all without ever asking for recognition or reward. It is time for the world to give something back to you. Alina accepted the position and the scholarship, crying so hard that she could barely sign the paperwork. She called Sophia from the parking lot and told her the news. Listening to her daughter scream with joy on the other end of the phone, Sophia could go to any college she wanted. What could become the doctor she had always dreamed of being, could build a future that her mother's sacrifices had made possible. In the weeks and months that followed, Elena's life transformed in ways she could never have predicted. The viral video continued to spread, and offers continued to pour in: invitations to perform, requests for interviews, opportunities that the cleaning woman from the executive floors could never have imagined. She accepted some of them, playing benefit concerts for children's charities and giving interviews where she shared her story of sacrifice and resilience. But she turned down the offers that would have taken her away from her home and her daughter, the record deals and world tours that would have required her to become someone she did not want to be. Instead, Alina used the money she earned from her performances to open a small music school in her neighborhood, a place where children from families like hers could come and learn to play for free. She called it Rose's Gift, after her mother, the woman who had first taught her that music was the language of the soul. The school grew quickly, filling with children who had the same light in their eyes that Alina had possessed when she was their age. Some of them were talented, some of them were not, but Alina taught them all with the same patience and love that her mother had shown her so many years ago in their tiny apartment in Madrid. Sophia graduated at the top of her class and got accepted to medical school just as she had always dreamed. On the day she left for college, she hugged her mother and thanked her for everything, not just the obvious things like food and shelter and education, but for the example Alina had set. The lesson she had taught without ever realizing she was teaching it. You showed me that being strong does not mean never being broken, Sophia said with tears in her eyes. It means putting yourself back together and helping others do the same. I am going to be a doctor because of you, Mama, because you taught me that taking care of people is the most important thing we can do. Alina watched her daughter drive away toward her future, and she felt a peace settle over her heart that she had not known in 20 years. She had lost so much along the way: her parents, her career, her dreams, but she had also gained so much more than she could ever have imagined. She thought of Victoria Ashford sometimes, wondered if the woman ever regretted the cruelty she had shown that night at the gala. But Alina found that she could not hold on to anger or resentment, because everything that had happened, even the mockery and the humiliation, had been part of the path that led her back to herself. The piano in her living room, a beautiful instrument that Mr. Whitmore had given her as a gift, was never silent anymore. Alina played every day, sometimes for audiences of hundreds and sometimes just for herself, filling her home with music that had waited 20 years to be released. And on the wall above the piano hung a simple framed photograph, a picture of a young woman in a black dress, sitting at a Steinway Grand in a ballroom full of wealthy strangers, her eyes closed and her hands frozen in mid-flight across the keys. It was a picture of the moment everything changed, the moment Alina Reyes stopped being invisible and started being herself again. I was never ashamed of being a cleaning woman, never pretended that those years had not happened or tried to hide them from her new friends and colleagues. Those years had taught her things that the conservatory never could have: humility and resilience, and the knowledge that every person, no matter how invisible they might seem, has a story worth hearing. And whenever a new student came to Rose's Gift, nervous and uncertain and afraid that they were not good enough to learn music, Alina would sit down beside them at the piano and tell them her story. She would tell them about the little girl from Madrid and the cleaning woman from the executive floors and the night when everything changed. You were never too old and never too poor and never too invisible to find your music, she would say, placing their small hands on the keys. It is in there, waiting for you. You just have to be brave enough to let it out.